So glad to have you with us here. I'm Christy Paul.
I'm Victor Blackwell. Good Saturday to you.
So President Trump denies the release of a Democratic memo on the Russia probe, saying that it was just too much sensitive information. This, of course, even though the Republicans were able to have their memo released just last week, and that was against the wishes of the FBI.
And a lot happened on this same day. More departures. Third in line at the Justice Department, gone. A second White House official in 3 days accused of domestic abuse is also gone. Deputy Chief of Staff is out of that position. And Chief of Staff John Kelly says he would be willing to leave as well if the president wants him to.
So Donald Trump's presidency, it has some critics raising the question, is our democracy in danger? Specifically Harvard professors who've studied democracies for decades, because they say the answer is yes.
So they argue that President Trump shows signs of a politician with authoritarian tendencies because he rejects democratic rules, denies the legitimacy of opponents, tolerates violence, and restricts civil liberties. Harvard professor and co-author of How Democracies Die, Daniel Ziblatt, joins us, along with CNN political commentator and former senior advisor to the Trump campaign, Jack Kingston. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
So we just listed off, Daniel, those 4 criteria, and you believe that President Trump meets those. I'm going to ask the headline question here, is the president, from your perspective, a threat to our democracy?
Well, we wrote this book, How Democracies Die, really inspired in part by the campaign, and that checklist that you just gave us. During the campaign season, during 2015-2016 campaign season, he went after the media, he condoned violence at election rallies, he said he wouldn't necessarily accept the results of the election. So this was all talk, and many people have said, well, take it easy, this is only talk. But we, having looked around the world, this set off alarm bells for us, because we've seen when democracies die around the world, often political leaders come to power displaying these same tendencies. Now, certainly once in office, it's a different question, but this at least should make citizens and potential allies of the president nervous.
So, Jack, when you listen to the president, because let's face it, words matter at the end of the day. He's the president. Even his tweets are considered to be official statements from the president. Do you see him edging toward demeaning democracy in some way or disintegrating it?
No, I don't. I have to say to the professor, my dad actually got a PhD from Cornell, so maybe I could talk a little bit about Ivy League politics, but they're notoriously Ivy Tower, isolated liberalism that's not tested. If you want to look at violence, why aren't we looking at Antifa? Why aren't we looking at the violence of the resistance who are denying the election results? How come the conversations of Eastern liberalism always conveniently leaves that out and then finds things about Donald Trump? He's moving on. He has got a great cabinet. He's got a great agenda.
Objectively, Jack, wait a minute, Jack, I was going to let you run there, but to characterize the president as moving on when I've got to check this, tweets about Hillary Clinton at least every month of his presidency, and he's almost 13 months in. Moving on is not objectively the way to describe President Trump's view of his political opponents.
She won't go away, and neither will Joe Biden. Joe Biden's out there now. I mean, Hillary Clinton shows up at the Grammys reading a book. I mean, come on, she's not exactly taking the George
Bush. Because the Grammys have nothing to do with politics.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Could I get in here for a second? I mean, one of the things that the president recently did, accusing his Democratic members of Congress of treason for not standing at the State of the Union address.
And you really think
again, it's only words, but it's dangerous words. When politicians use these kinds of words, this makes politics much more dangerous.
Hold on, one at a time, Jack. We'll let you respond. Go ahead, finish, Daniel.
Professor Maxine Waters and all the other Democrats have never used violent terms, and a Bernie Sanders guy was so inspired that he comes down and he shoots members of Congress.
But you can't blame that on Bernie Sanders. Come on, Jack. That's a step too far.
We're talking about the President of the United States, not members of Congress.
But all the liberals were always saying, anytime somebody did something, oh, that's because of the Trump rhetoric that it's happened. The only rhetoric that I know, well, excuse me, it's not the only one, but the most striking example of rhetoric that caused violence was this Bernie Sanders nut. And I would not blame that on Bernie Sanders. I think that
Okay.
Some of this is just part
Objectively,
of
again,
democracy
Jack,
and
that's
free
just
speech.
inaccurate. There's a difference between, and we'll get back to democracies, how democracies die, but when you point out that a person who supported Bernie Sanders shot a member of Congress, Bernie Sanders never said, go out and shoot a member of Congress. President Trump, as a candidate, did say, I'd like to punch them in the face, and if you hit one of these guys who wants to throw a tomato, I'll pay your legal fees. Okay, so there's a difference there. But let's get back to the list of.
Can I
Go ahead, Daniel. Go ahead,
Hey,
Daniel.
Victor, let me just
Yeah,
say
so I'd
this.
like to just kind of
Wait. We can't. One at a time. Daniel, go ahead, and then we'll have
Mr.
to hear from
Kingston,
the
I don't
congressman.
disagree with. Excuse me. So, the point that we make in our book is that when powerful politicians use this kind of rhetoric, it's dangerous on its own, but it also provokes a counter-reaction. When we look around the world, when authoritarian leaders use this kind of rhetoric, the Democratic opposition radicalizes, and you get a kind of spiraling politics, exactly the kind of thing that Mr. Kingston's worried about. And so the president has this particular responsibility to behave in responsible ways to not provoke that kind of cycle. We look at interwar Europe, we look at Latin America in the 1960s and 70s, this kind of polarized rhetoric that Mr. Kingston, frankly, is using right now is exactly a kind of predictable response to this kind of politics. And the president has a particular moral responsibility to stand up and not engage in that kind of rhetoric.
Let me ask you this: Did you cite the example when President Obama said they're going to get their knives and we're going to get our guns, or was that because it's a Barack Obama we can't use that?
Yeah.
Did you use that? Was that in your book? Did you use that
so
quote?
in our book we go.
Did you
go
use
through
that
instances
quote?
of violations of democracy.
Did you use that
we go
quote?
through instances of should I answer the
Just
question?
say yes or no. Did you use that quote or not? Because I got to tell you.
I'm telling you what we say. In the
Jack,
book,
let
we
him
point to
answer.
instances of violations of democratic norms, including the use of executive orders under President Obama. So we're not. This is not. We're social scientists. There's a way
But
that
not
one can
that
try to
quote.
be neutral, and that's what we're trying to do in this book.
But
We're
that
pointing
quote,
to
that
worrying
quote,
signs.
which I
And
got to
again,
say,
why we can't have just an open discussion about this without engaging in this kind of rhetoric is part of the
well,
problem.
that
This is
that
exactly
quote
what we're
though,
trying to describe.
that quote though was conveniently left out of your discussion. I mean, I got to tell you, as a conservative, frankly, it bothered me. It bothered me that the president would use rhetoric like that. But didn't bother you though, because he's somebody who you happen to agree with most of the time.
Well, no, I think, Jack, what it shows is that every president offends somebody. Somebody has a problem with whatever any president says, depending on what side of the aisle they're sitting on. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But when we look at President Trump, in this particular case, we wanted to get a question to you about what's happened overnight. This speechwriter that has left the presidency, the administration now, because he has been accused of domestic abuse. And in his defense, we have to say, he said he was actually the victim of domestic abuse. It was not him against his ex-wife, but he immediately resigned. That is very different than what we have seen from the president when it came to Rob Porter, a man who the FBI had said, look, there could be some problems here. Both of his ex-wives say that he was a domestic abuser. They had a criminal complaint from the second ex-wife that she had filed, and yet this man was given security clearance to some degree, not full clearance, but some security clearance. And he was right next to the president that whole year that they knew about it. What do you say about, when you just said, we started and you said he's got a great administration, that administration is losing people left and right, it seems, just in the last week. How can the president remedy this, in your opinion, Jack?
Well, let me say, one thing that they should do is audit everybody's background from the very beginning, and why that wasn't done is beyond me. And I think, frankly, it is unexcusable. I would say that probably in the case, this was somebody who was hired by Reince Priebus, and Kelly somewhat inherited him. He apparently had great demeanor in the White House, which is typical, by the way, of wife abusers, that there is a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde side to them, where they're charming, they're smart, they know how to cover it up. And perhaps he even said, listen, this was 15 years ago. I've rehabbed, I'm a different guy now. So we don't really know when Kelly knew or what he knew. There was an unidentified senior Washington person who said, well, Kelly and McGahn knew. We really don't know who that person is or what they knew, but I'm not going to give them a pass on that. It's their business to know the background of everybody, and they're particularly who are handling classified information. So I think there was obviously a mistake.
Well, Don McGahn knew early in 2017 The FBI came back to the White House. General Kelly knew several times throughout 2017 and did not make the decision to fire him. That's not just the Washington Post reporting. That is CNN's reporting that General Kelly knew months ago, and other outlets have it as well. Jack Kingston, Daniel Ziblatt, the book is How Democracies Die. Thank you so much both for being with us.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All righty. Listen, Toronto police.